So for some reason, my video on the Golden Path really blew up, and I got a ton of views on it. And people have been asking, Argent, we want more Dune content. Well, here I am to deliver because I actually had a Dune video planned. I just wanted to do a little bit of research on it before I posted it. So this is about the time of the Titans and the Titans, which are a piece of Dune lore that I think a lot of people might not necessarily know about because it takes place in the prequel novels. Now, the prequel novels are very controversial. Some people hate them, other people like them. I tend to like them. I think they fill in a lot of gaps, and it doesn't really bother me as much that they're more generic sci-fi, which is kind of the expression. I guess kind of the complaint a lot of people have. I mean generic as a in the sense of like more mainstream sci-fi and less kind of cerebral than the Frank Herbert books. But I'm okay with that because it was before Melange, and kind of a lot of the weird stuff we see in Dune was really an important part of the universe. So this is about the time of the Titans, which is actually quite important, despite it being a little bit obscure in the lore, and despite it being overshadowed by the Butlerian Jihad and the later Carino Empire. So let me try to paint a picture for you. Because it's really funny, because this was written before the modern, like, alt-right, edge lords, neo-reactionaries, all that stuff kind of started to emerge online, before Pol was really kind of more well known. So basically, the Titans emerged during the Old Empire. The Old Empire was the last Earth centric human civilization. While Earth would be the ceremonial capital of Ominous's machine empire, really Carino or Corin was the actual headquarters where most of the industry and military forces were based. So so the old empire is more or less a continuation of the world we have today. In Dune, I believe it's implied that the Cold War ended with the Soviet Union in America more or less coming to a truce or an alliance, and what emerges from it is kind of a mixture of both systems. At least that's kind of my understanding. That's why we have English as kind of being the main language in the galaxy, with a bunch of loanwords, particularly Slavic loanwords. So eventually, humanity discovered faster than light travel. Now, faster than light travel exists with before the invention of fold space. It's just a lot slower, which is kind of funny. Faster than light travel is not instantaneous. It's kind of like warp drive in Star Trek. So humanity was able to colonize a lot of planets, but just not nearly as many as they would eventually be able to with the invention of fold space. They all had to be relatively close together, and the old empire would become the kind of the core of the Imperium, the 10,000 worlds, as they're known, the known universe. So the old empire eventually it somehow became a monarchy, and it was ruled by the old emperors that we know absolutely nothing about. I believe there's a character mentioned in passing who's a descendant of the last one. But under the old empire, humanity kind of reached the zenith of its technological achievement. In Dune, technology, aside from like spaceships and a couple other things like anti-grav, is very low. Technology's advanced, but all computers have been purged for reasons I think I go into in some other videos, but we'll talk about that some other time. So the old empire was, I guess it's a bit like Wall-E or Travelers, Passengers, or any of these kind of, or I guess Return from the Stars, where it's this utopian society in which all menial tasks have been offloaded to machines and human beings no longer have to work. So there's a post scarcity economy, and humanity exists in a era of continual peace and prosperity. However, as has happened, because basically there's no real reason for fighting, ennui has set in. a completely stagnant culture has developed in which there are no real further technological advancements and no exploration that goes on. Everything's just kind of in an eternal boring state of gray, an eternal static society. And it's kind of similar to how kind of rightists, we kind of on the right view the current society. It's the end of history, as Francis Fukuyama said. It's liberalism has finally won, and liberalism has become sustainable due to a post-scarcity economy. So the old empire more or less managed to destroy the forces of history. The dialectic came to an end, kind of the known galaxy. There was no more war or crime or disease or famine or any of that stuff. So, as with the current order, there was a group of privileged upper middle class white kids who really weren't particularly happy with the state of affairs. Does this sound at all familiar? So they were a group of people who liked to post on image boards, and I'm not making this up. They played strategy games online. Most of them met each other by playing war games online and eventually kind of forming a network together where they discussed the philosophies of a reactionary philosopher named Tlaloc. Tlaloc? Tlaloc. I'm not sure how you pronounce it. But so a group of people came across the philosophies of Tlaloc. Tlaloc. I'll just pronounce it Tlaloc. So Tlaloc was a philosopher who came from the fringes of the galaxy, of the known worlds, and he had the principle that the stagnation of the empire was basically bad, that the end of history was not desirable, in that it was destroying the human spirit and destroying human nature, in that kind of the system had to be broken apart so that progress and the historical dialectic could be moving once again, and that humanity was basically just atrophying. So the group of online, for lack of a better term, NEETs, because they were all kind of privileged and they didn't really have to work or do anything, and they just sat at home and played video games, came across his philosophy, and they were immediately taken with it. One of them, who eventually took the name Agamemnon, a man named Andrew Skouros. I'm not good with my Greek. Through 23andMe or some other DNA series, DNA website, was able to trace his lineage back to the time of before the Old Empire, thousands of years to the House of Atreides, and that he was descended from King Agamemnon. Now, he would eventually go on to have a son named Vorian Atreides, and he is the father of House Atreides, the descendants from both Agamemnons. Obviously a Greek family, although, as with all royal families, the culture and ethnicity are kind of different because they tend to interbreed with other foreign royal families, but I digress. So he met a girl who eventually, online, who was also a NEET, who eventually became known as Hera. So they had a sexual affair with each other, and in addition to sex, they discussed reactionary philosophy. So the various online people decided that they were going to join along with Tlaloc and overthrow the stale, torpid, ennui infected civilization, and they were going to return the flow of history. They were great idealists. Their, for lack of a better term, online shitposting was turning into reality. Now, one of them was a man who became known as Xerxes, and he was the prince of a planet known as Ix. Now, for those of you who know Dune, the name Ix should be very familiar, but for those of you who don't, Ix is one of the wealthiest planets in the universe. Maybe other than Tylaxu and Arrakis is the wealthiest planet. Oh, and Kitane, obviously, since it's the capital. But it's where most of the advanced technology in the galaxy is made. Eventually, the Ixians were the ones who were able to build a computer that could do the work of a guild navigator. They built AIs, they built pulsed lasguns, and all kinds of other fantastical inventions. So Xerxes was incredibly bored with his life. He basically spent his days with wine, booze, and women, etc. But he eventually kind of, chasing the dragon. He decided that the life of luxury wasn't enough, and he met up with the other Titans and offered to fund their crusade, and became known as Xerxes. So then they met the third, or kind of the fourth main member of their group, Wilhelm Jather, who eventually took the name Barbarossa. So they were all LARPers who took names of ancient gods or heroes. Tlaloc is, I believe, the Aztec god of... Is it... Aztec god of rain and fertility. So there was Hecate, Hera. Eventually there's a Beowulf, who's kind of one of the Neo-Cymeks, Ajax. There's a whole bunch. They all take... So Barbarossa realized that with his superior hacking skills that he had honed from hours of online strategy games and posting on the future version of Pol, was able to hack into the AI network that controlled the old empire and took it over. So all at once, the Titans went from a bunch of NEETs to the rulers of the known galaxy. So now they had achieved their goals. They were able to provide enlightened rule to humanity at long last. History would resume. The spiritual and moral degradation would cease. Kali Yuga would be over, and a new golden age would occur. So what did they do with this opportunity? They ruled like mindless tyrants and spent their days engaged in hedonism. Yeah, despite all their talk and grand ideals, shortly after overthrowing the old empire, Tlaloc died, and the Titans became, with their robot servants, all took over. They divided the galaxy up between them, with Agamemnon as given the title general and as the high king of the various Titans, and they spent their days indulging their various pleasures, women, wine, booze, but they added to that brutality, and they would set up, they'd watch blood sport, they'd kill people for fun, all that kind of stuff. So basically they just ruled as unenlightened, bloodthirsty tyrants. Not at all how Julius Evola would have intended. Not at all. They betrayed the principles of reaction and were corrupted by Kali Yuga. So the Titans ruled over their planets as LARPers who saw themselves as gods. After Tlaloc died, though, they came to realize that they wouldn't live forever. Now, the old empire had developed life extension technology, because why not? And using their life extension technology, they realized they could only live for so long. So what they wound up doing is they removed their brains, put them into brain tanks, and became Cymeks. So a Cymek is a human brain in a tank that's hooked up to a robotic body. And they have all their senses. They can even have sex, bizarrely enough, using their minds. They apparently gain some form of telepathy. It's really weird. But the Titans all became Cymeks. And they would have giant robot bodies that they made just as LARPy, with flamethrowers and plasma cannons, and they were multiple stories tall. And eventually they would find new followers who, I assume shit posters from future Pol, who they'd make into the Neo-Cymeks. And they continued their reign of terror across the galaxy, but they could LARP even harder now that they could assume the forms of other non-human forms. And it seemed that they would eternally rule over the galaxy. However, Xerxes had very low agency and very, very high time preference. He eventually just became so consumed with his pleasure in games, he wound up turning, much like the old empire, all of his resources and all of his governing over the machines. Unfortunately, because of how much more advanced AI had gotten since they had vastly expanded it in order to maintain control of like large pieces of the galaxy without having to rely on humans, the AI in his sector reached critical mass and became sentient into the being known as Ominous. Ominous, the Overmind or the Evermind. Ominous would rapidly gain control of most of the known galaxy and establish the synchronized worlds. The Titans were left little more than shadows of their former selves. Due to a programming backdoor that Barbarossa had installed, Ominous was unable to kill them directly, and the Titans were reduced to building grandiose monuments to themselves and serving in Ominous's army, occasionally fighting in the Colosseum, and basically just completely worthless, not at all like their previous glorious selves. So that's kind of the tale of the Titans. They had a brief resurgence after the events of, I believe it's the Butlerian Jihad, or partial way through the Machine Crusade, where they succeeded in escaping Ominous's rule and fled into the far reaches of space and began taking over planets that had been left barren during the fighting between the League of Nobles, which was a large portion of the old empire that had not fallen to the Titans and had developed their own civilization with advanced technology but without computers that would eventually become the Carino Empire after Ominous was defeated. So planets left vacant during that they went to, and they came to people who basically had nothing and were former slaves, and started to mass convert them into Cymeks. Eventually, after the Great Purging, where the Navy of the Jihad used full spaceships to go to every single machine planet and nuke them into oblivion, Agamemnon realized that since Cymeks were shielded from radiation, they could occupy all of the synchronized worlds and begin extracting their immense resources and eventually rebuild and have a new time of Titans. However, the Titans were all eventually killed when Vorian Atreides... Oh, by the way, Agamemnon had stored a large quantity of his sperm, probably from watching hentai, so he could keep having children because he wanted to have a successor. He wanted to start a grand dynasty. And he couldn't reproduce anymore because his brain was in a case and his physical body was gone. So Vorian Atreides succeeded in getting in, and together with Quentin Butler, they succeeded in killing the last of the Titans and the last of the Cymeks, and they faded into obscurity, never to be mentioned again. So the Cymeks and the whole Titan thing wound up being extremely similar to Pol, bizarrely enough, a group of online NEET reactionaries who had the autistic dream of restarting history with their esoteric philosophy. However, it didn't exactly work out, as it turned out that a lot of them were sociopaths, and they wound up instituting a brutal, meaningless tyranny that was much worse than the ennui that had preceded it. So that is the video on the Titans and the time of the Titans. I hope you enjoyed it. If you liked the video, give a like, and more stuff to